It's time to rip the cover off what really works to ditch addiction, depression, anger, anxiety, and all other kinds of human suffering. No, not sobriety. We're talking the F word here, freedom. We'll share straight from the trenches what we've learned from leaving our own addictions behind and coaching hundreds of others to do the same. And since it's such a heavy topic, we might as well have a good time while we're at it. And welcome back, folks. Today, I want to explore the great lie. Now, it's not what you think. It's not some cosmological secret that I've been harboring in my chest. It's nothing like that. This is just something very, very simple. And it started right back at the beginning. I've alluded to this in the last couple of podcasts, and I've alluded to it many, many times in the past, and we've even talked about it at some length, and that has to do with language. So when you're born, sound waves are coming in all the time, right? And your ears in the womb are only picking up kind of muffled sounds and whatnot, which is why loud noises are things that scare babies. They're not something that they would have felt in the womb or experienced in the womb. And so now it's a new thing. And so they have a reaction. A lot of people tend to try and make the argument that these are hardwired into the human system, that babies, the only two things that babies instinctively respond to are loud noises and falling. But that's because those are two things that they don't experience inside of a womb. They're never falling. They're always floating. So they're not accelerating at that rate at all. And they're not experiencing loud noises. So basically all you're seeing with a baby is a response to a new stimulus that they're not yet familiar with yet. And so their whole body is kind of responding in that way. And it's responding involuntarily at that. And it'll do that with the first breath. If you've noticed, when a baby takes its first breath, it's quite a show. They're screaming. And, if it really is oxygen running into the lungs for the first time that way, and it's like oxygen coming back to your tissues after you've cut the blood circulation off and there's pins and needles, then wow, that would be a real big experience, right? And so when a baby's born, its ears aren't yet developed to hear sound or used to hearing sound waves as they come through air. And so it has to learn what those are, which means at first it's going to be a little bit blurry or overwhelming, and there'll be a lot of things, a lot of activity going on, and they won't be able to make any meaning out of those sounds at all. In fact, meaning will be something that doesn't even come for years. There's just sound, and that's it. And they're dancing with those sounds. They're feeling the reverberations of the sounds in your system. In fact, if you're really tight in your body, you're missing out on something incredible, which is the more that you relax, the more that your body opens up, and the more free you become emotionally, the more your own voice resonates in your own system to the point where it's like getting an internal tickle massage every time you talk. You think I just like to talk on these podcasts. No, really, I'm enjoying myself, both with the content and with just the sound waves coming through my system. And we teach at our retreats some ways of opening that up, but that's a side note. So babies, when they're learning, they're just hearing sounds, and all of them are new. Even the sounds they were familiar with, like babies learned their mom's voice in the womb, which ironically they figured out that babies learn this because babies stop listening. They're interested in new things and trying to figure out new things and using their newly acquired mental and cerebral energy for figuring out new and learning new things in the world. And so babies are learning, and they're interacting with all these kinds of sounds and then trying to figure out how they connect them with other sense information. In other words, their brain is learning how to put together a three-dimensional, cohesive experience, projected or holographic kind of experience of reality. If you've heard people call reality a hologram, let me put that in plain terms. All of your senses gather information. You've heard this from me. And then your brain pieces that together and in some way, shape, or form projects it to you as an experience. So it's taken information and it's turned it into a simulated experience that isn't reality. It's as close as it can get to reality. And so to say reality is a hologram, it just means your experience is being created by you and it isn't the real thing. So the sounds come. And as the baby grows, it starts to be able to distinguish certain language patterns. So in the beginning, babies are open to all different languages. And then as time goes on, their brain, in some way, shape, or form, starts to filter out sounds that don't seem to have as much significance. So babies become accustomed to English language, and their brain starts to form to what that language is. There's been plenty of research about how language itself, the language you speak, influences the way that you see reality. The way that you see color even has been influenced by the language that you speak. It's that minute, the influence that it has. It's that global, that profound, that deep. So the brain starts to filter out and focus on certain sounds as significant and filter out the rest. Then over time, it starts to learn what those sounds are. And those sounds are pointing to anyway, because humans are using sound in order to point to something and to talk about something, even if it's not there. But in order to do that, I have to know what you mean by or what you're pointing at with the sound. And so babies learn certain words. At first they learn to go like, oh, that like set of squiggles on a page, that's A, and that one's B. And then they have to begin to identify it by alphabet. This is something I had to do recently, a couple years ago when I started studying Hebrew, a brand new alphabet, totally different set of sounds, totally different way to read because the vowels are like little dots around the letters and they're not actually letters in their own right. And so there's only 22 consonants. I guess you could call it 23 in that language. Or 24 if you're using one of the older ones. But like there's not that many letters in the language compared to English, and yet the vowels are not included. And so there's kind of more in some ways. Sanskrit has like 50 different ones. And so it's a new language. And that means I have to figure out how to read. And it's halting, and then I don't even know what I'm doing. I'm just making a noise associated with a shape. And then eventually the baby starts to figure out that that noise has a meaning. And then when they recognize that, then they can link those shapes on the page to the meaning and so on. And they start to develop this set of ideas in their head that they can sort of recall through imagination. But in the beginning, it's just sounds. And that's the reality of life. Life itself is just, in a sense, a reverberation. Electrons zipping around atomic nuclei at incredible speeds, oscillating at a certain rate. That rate is how we measure a second. So an atomic clock is a clock that's measuring the rate of oscillation based on a certain particle. Used to be that, by the way, a second was a segment of the length of the year 1900. And over time, scientists decided to find a better way of measuring that could be replicable over time, so that we weren't just comparing our year to the year 1900 as if that's some arbitrary measure. So they measured it according to the number of oscillations in a given amount of time, like number of oscillations of a certain particle. And what they found was when they started doing that, they were like, oh, this can be replicated in labs everywhere. It's the same every time. When they started doing that, they started to recognize that actually the length of a year, the Earth is slowing down. In other words, the year is getting a little bit longer in terms of its spin. And in terms of it's going around the sun, the length of a year is slowly getting longer. So since I don't know if it was the 60s or 70s, there have been like 27 leap seconds. They figured out in order to do that, what we're going to do is just every so often, we're going to jam a leap second into a year. Maybe there haven't been that many leap seconds. I can't remember the exact amount, but they've jammed a bunch of leap seconds in order to continue to expand and account for the lengthening of the year and the slowing down of the orbit of the Earth. So this is pretty remarkable, right? And that's all has to do with oscillation. So everything that's going on in creation is just reverberation, oscillation, things just moving back and forth, patterns, whether it's light waves or sound waves or anything else. So there's a reverberation there. And where there's a reverberation, you can your senses may pick up that reverberation as physical touch, as light sensors. It just depends on how the cells read it and what kinds of reverberations they pick up on. And that's all that's happening. But as humans, in order to interact in society and in order to learn amazing things and achieve incredible things throughout human history, this is not bad. But in order to do that, what we did was we started to make sounds and pretend that those sounds are the things that we're talking about. Back in the, couple thousand years ago, Lao Tzu said in the very beginning of the Tao Te Ching, he's like, the road you're talking about is not the road you're walking upon. The word road is not a road. It's that simple. But because we get so used to it, we start to mistake the words that we say for the things that are there. And this then starts to become the basis not only of our possibility, but also of our suffering. As I mentioned in the episode where we talked about technology only amplifies and empowers what is there. So if suffering is there, words as a technology can amplify that. If suffering is there, sounds as a technology can amplify that in a big way. They only amplify what's there. It's just a weaving together of different markings or different sounds, and we're pretending it's something different. And so it's not good that language is good or bad. It has produced so many different things, but it also has started to blind us to what is actually real. To the point where Plato, 400 years before Jesus shows up, so before the Common Era, Plato's there. He's looking at the demise of Athens. He's watching all these things go down, and he's the first real philosopher that has created a massive body of work. There are other philosophers that lived before him, obviously, and after, but he wrote like a playwright. So here's a guy who's writing like a poet, you know? They're dialogues, his Socratic dialogues. He's putting the words in Socrates' mouth, but they're his own words. Maybe Socrates said a few of them, but they're Plato's take on Socrates. And then Plato's putting his own thoughts into Socrates' mouth. And so they're like plays, you know, there's a scene, there's a couple of characters, Socrates is talking, then someone else is talking, it's a conversation, as opposed to the incredibly dense philosophical essays that I had to write in graduate school, where you're picking apart an argument and whatnot. And so it was popular literature. And he has taken language has been around for a long time, you know, and especially with the Greeks, it had been around for a couple hundred years, where they had finally come out of their kind of another dark age after a huge kind of cataclysmic event that they'd been kind of, their civilization had been wiped out for a couple hundred years. And then the Minoans show up, and somewhere around 800 BCE is when we get Thales of Miletus and this new flowering and outgrowth of civilization that shows on. And 400 years later, here's Plato, and he's believing in democracy and all these things, and then they end up killing Socrates, and so he's a little disgruntled and all this stuff. But in his writings, he lays out in the Republic how to have a good society. By the way, you don't have to agree with him. You can, but his belief was that, you know, the raising of children isn't something that should be done by parents, but that leaders should be doing it, and that we should systematically lie to people. And there's all kinds of interesting things that he has declared are the best ways to live in society. But what he did was he laid out a way of thinking about all kinds of problems that humans think about, ethics and whatnot. And Aristotle, his student, responded to that, and they began a dialogue and a discourse. Well, Plato is the one then that set the stage for Western thinking, whether intentionally or unintentionally. His university is the one that went for several hundred years and was the kind of like benchmark for all kinds of universities. And then those got taken up into the Christian church, including his ideas about the body, and that the body is evil and bad and needs to be subjected, and it destroys the spirit. These are ideas he had. He was the one, not the Jews before him. He was the one that came up with the idea that there's a world of perfect forms beyond this planet. And that world of perfect forms. Now, yes, a heaven and a hell have been spoken of before, but they have gone through an evolution of things, as we've talked about. But he's the one that said there is a perfect world beyond this world, and this world only has imperfect forms. And, you know, being in the body, we have to deny this body and whatnot. And he set all of these things in motion, and exalted reason above anything else. In his Phaedo, he said outright through Socrates' mouth, that like, whoa, hold on. Before we start like discounting reason and thinking that our thoughts are negative, let's step back and understand that like even my senses deceive me. And so, you know, the only thing I can really rely on is reason. And so what I do, Socrates said, is that I hit upon something that makes perfect sense, that like really matches reason. And then anything that agrees with that I hold on to, and anything that disagrees with it, I throw away. That, my friends, is the definition of confirmation bias. This is how religions work. This is how modern medical research works. This is how and we try to get rid of it. We're trying intelligently to get rid of it. So which is why we do blind and double blind tests and placebo studies and controlled studies and all these different things. But still, there is a bias.
If you or someone you know is looking to drop the F-bomb of freedom in their life, whether that's from past trauma, depression, anxiety, addiction, or any other host of emotional and personal struggles, but they just don't know how or want some help doing it, head on over to thefreedomspecialist.com/feelbetternow and check out some of the things we've got in store for you, or book a call so we can look at your unique situation and get you the help that you're looking for.
And we're trying to get rid of the bias so that we can really hit upon something that's real. In other words, we're trying to go back with science, which is what Aristotle was trying to do, empirical kind of science, to observation. Nevertheless, Aristotle's ideas didn't really take hold for a long time, not until like St. Thomas Aquinas and some other stuff, right? Plato's ideas, and that's like 1200s, right? So Plato's ideas were the ones that really took hold for a long time. That my beliefs about reality are more important than what's really there. And then, of course, you get René Descartes, who talks about I think, therefore I am. And there's been this exaltation of thinking that has been there for a long time in the human situation, in the human condition, in our society. And as a result, we tend to think that our thoughts about reality are real. No, I know what happened. No, you did this. No, you did that. And we're not trained to throw away our thoughts for new observations. Think about it. If Socrates, according to Plato, were learning to drive and he were to operate a vehicle the same way he was saying he should operate in life, then that means he's supposed to just think he knows which way he's going to go and not trust his eyeballs because they deceive him. So it's better to drive down the road blind than it is to throw away your assumptions about what's going to happen and just keep paying attention. Yes, your eyes can deceive you. That's why you keep looking, so that you're gathering more information. But that's not something that has been a part of human society for a long time, and many people aren't trained in that. People talk about learning to think critically. It's better to learn to observe and perceive, because then you don't have to worry about the thoughts as much, because then you're only dealing with what's there instead of having to cut through a bunch of theories and hypotheses to get to what's there. Now, granted, if we're talking about quantum physics and all that other stuff, that's a whole different ballgame. But I'm talking about interacting practically in life. And so here we are in a society that has trained our children to believe that the words and ideas we share in school, and we put them through 12 years of education, and then college, and then sometimes master's degree and whatnot, that those ideas are reality. That they are truth, to the point where your kids come home and they say, "Did you know this?" Your kids don't know it either. They've read it. And whoever wrote it down might not have known it either. They might have passed it along. And so we go on believing things that aren't the truth only because they got passed on in the form of a textbook, or by someone wearing a white coat, or someone who had a fancy certificate, or a podcast, because people tend to think that I'm some famous person when I'm just a human being who still poops and who still has toots and who still doesn't always eat the best food and is working on it, and who still has moments where he's not, 100% blissed out. Now, compared to where I was a decade ago, it's unrecognizable, and you would say I'm happy all the time. But I'm working on finer and finer things. But I'm just a human being. I'm not better or worse than anybody else. I've just practiced maybe a little bit longer at some of these things, and that's it. So our children grow up taking on authority, not listening and with their own ears, not seeing with their own eyes, and being told, you tell the kids like, "Oh, this hurts," and mom and dad say, "No, you're okay." So the kid starts to not trust their own assessment of their own situation. Now, granted, they might actually be okay. It's not as bad as they think. But just telling them, no, that's okay, you're not hurt. Well, that doesn't help them learn to perceive. It only tells them, I can't trust myself. I need to trust my parents. And that's a disservice to children who are born with eyes. To anyone, any being born with their own set of senses, it's a disservice to them to tell them that they don't understand. It's a service to them to get them to start looking. So we grow up and we learn language, and then we start to believe that the language and ideas that we read are reality, that we know reality. Let me give you a hint. You know you have a hand, right? Until you know the things you think you know, the way you know you have a hand, you don't know them. You only believe them. How do you know you have a hand? You simply know. It is direct perception. The minute you can't perceive your hand, it's fallen asleep. Now you get worried, don't you? You start shaking it, wiggling it, like, is it still alive? Oh my gosh, because the perception has gone. And now doubt arises. You want to get rid of doubts? Enhance your perception, not your belief. That's the key. You want to get rid of doubts about your freedom? Enhance your perception of freedom. It's your perception of well-being, not your beliefs about it. And that's all I tried to do in all the stuff that I was doing for myself. Is I wanted to know that I was okay. I didn't want to like believe I was okay or believe that a program was going to work. I wanted to be able to try it and see things happening along the way, even if they were small at first, and I'd be able to pick up on them. And that's what I did. And it's been powerful for a lot of people, but it boils down to no longer believing the thoughts in my mind, no longer believing the ideas that I've carried for a long time or the hypotheses. It comes down to constantly going back to the great question of what is actually happening. The great lie that is holding you hostage is that you believe your thoughts about reality, that you believe that your thoughts and your ideas are reality, and they're not. They are happening inside of reality. And when you can see the bigger picture, you can enjoy the thoughts without ever being controlled by them. This includes your thoughts about yourself. Your name is just a sound. But when someone says it with a mean voice, you feel like they've injured you. When someone says it with a nice voice, you feel like they've tickled you and that good things are happening. But in both cases, all that happened was that a sound emanated from a throat and passed by a waggling tongue. That's it. You took in those sound waves, interpreted them in your mind into a meaning, decided whether that meaning was good or bad for you, and then produced an experience. That experience is not reality. That's your own creation. It's your own creation within reality, but it isn't a reflection of the world outside of you. It's inside. And when you're free from your own name even, that isn't who you are. That's just a way that you've learned to navigate with the world. It's very, very useful to have a name because then you can start to interact with people. But that isn't you. Then you'll stop having to protect your good name. You'll stop having to worry about a reputation and so many other things because you'll be interacting with life itself. And I'll tell you this, you'll also get rid of your opinions of other people, and then you'll be able to connect with them just as they are. One of the most profound experiences humans are craving is to be seen and heard and loved just as they are without any requirement that they be any different. You yourself, if everything in your life just showed you that you're okay, that's all you really want. There's nothing else that you're wanting. And as you learn to get rid of the ideas in your head, which we teach some very practical, very simple methods for doing this in the programs we've built, as you learn to get rid of the ideas in your mind about other people, you'll be able to interact with them in a deeply connected way, in a profoundly connected way. My wife and I, our relationship, despite the fact that we faced divorce a couple times, is so incredible. It's beyond what I could have even possibly imagined so long ago when we were really just struggling to move along. And there's no requirement that my wife ever be anything different than what she is. Even if she hates my guts, there's no requirement. I just get to interact with her as she is. And what I find is when I'm no longer holding an opinion about her or the kids, they tend to just let go of their suffering around me. And they find a space where they're no longer feeling like they have to defend themselves. And life becomes this beautiful adventure. And my kids actually start listening to me, which is also a perk. So if you've been struggling, maybe get rid of your opinions about your kids and their future. The point here is this. Don't believe the lie you've told yourself. Don't believe that your ideas about reality are reality. Give yourself permission to question, to say, what if that's not true? What if there's something else happening? And you might surprise yourself with how quickly you start to feel free from things that have felt like you're stuck in them, because you only ever feel stuck when you don't like the options presented to you. But guess who's presenting you the options? You are. So challenge them. Give yourself another option. And then you won't feel stuck anymore. And this frees you from the great lie that your ideas, words, and thoughts are reality. Nope, they're not. Reality itself is so much bigger and so much more glorious than anything that you could think. And if you'll just set your thoughts down for a second and do the opposite of Descartes, cease to exist, cease to be a thinking being, you might find more life and love and happiness and freedom than you imagined possible, because your imagination, that's limited by your thoughts. Reality isn't.
And that's it for today's Alive and Free podcast. If you enjoyed this show and want some more freedom bombs landing in your earbuds, subscribe right now at wherever you get your podcasts from. And while you're at it, give us a rating and a review. It'll help us keep delivering great stuff to you. Plus, it's just nice to be nice.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.